Harriet, why won't you talk to us about child abuse, Harriet? What are you going to do about institutional paedophile rings that are operating in this country now? Do you believe children were buried in Shirley Oaks?
That's what I know.
How would you know? You're the one who ordered it to be levelled. My name's Bill Maloney, and I'm a documentary filmmaker and also a victim of institutional child abuse. Institutional child abuse means within the care system, the government care system, if you like. And today I'm going to be interviewing a guy called Chris Fay. And Chris, would you like to tell the audience who you are?
Yeah, I'm a former adult advisor to the National Association of Young People in Care, which was a group made up of kids who were in the care system around the country, and I was their adult advisor up until about 1992.
And what are we going to be talking about today, Chris?
Oh, where do you want to start, Bill?
Well, the main subject is Elm Guest House.
Elm Guest House, yeah.
Okay, so you kick it off. You tell me all about Elm Guest House.
It first came about when we were approached by a woman called Dr. Adeline Stolper, who was a consultant psychiatrist at the Maudsley Hospital, and she asked us, would we...
That's in South East London?
That's in South East London. Would we talk to a patient of hers whose name was Carol Kazir, and her the story being that her son had been taken off her and put into care, and she hadn't been allowed access to it. When we eventually did get talk to Carol Kazir, we found out she was the owner of a guest house in Barnes in South East London from about 1977 until June 82, when it was closed following a police raid.
And that guest house was?
Elm Guest House. Now,
in Barnes, is it?
In Barnes, yeah, southwest London. Now, according to Carol Kazir, the raid had been carried out by Special Branch with the aid of the SPG, which is the Special Patrol Group.
Why was it raided, Chris?
Well, we never actually found out the reason for that, because, as I said, Carol Kazir, backed up by her family and her solicitor, maintained that the raid was carried out under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, 1976.
In 1976?
Right, the 1976 Act, which means it was a security matter and the involvement of the security services. However, on the other side, the police and the authorities always maintained that the raid was carried out in response to complaints from neighbours under vice legislation. So you had the police on one hand saying they were raiding it because it was being used as a brothel, and on the other hand you had the Kazirs plus their lawyers and everybody else saying they were raided under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. It's the only law that was around then where the police could stop you seeing your solicitor for up to 36 hours.
Right.
But to do that...
In custody, so they could hold you in custody. And I don't know if we said it, but Carol Kazir was in fact the owner of Elm Guest House.
Her and her husband Harry.
Right, so there's been a raid.
There's been a raid.
Yeah.
They've given her what's called a notice to detain persons under the Act, which says you're not allowed contact with anybody, even a solicitor. Now that was the only piece of evidence that existed back in 1990 regarding the raid. There were no records of...
So they gagged her more or less?
They did, but the question then becomes, why would they be raiding a guest house that was being used as a brothel under the Prevention of Terrorism Act?
Right.
So then that's when it started to become really, really dodgy, because very, very soon we discovered who some of these patrons of this brothel were.
Yeah, and they were very important people.
Very important.
Politicians, film stars,
yeah.
entertainers.
Yeah, and there was also a thing that we became aware of very, very quickly. One of the people who used that guest house was, in fact, Anthony Blunt. Anthony Blunt was this disgraced spy who'd been spying for the KGB for years.
For the Russians.
But they'd given him a free pardon and given him a job as head of the Queen's Pictures. Now, and that very quickly led us to people like Commander Richard Trestrail, who was the head of the Royal Protection Squad. There was a guy called Richard Langley, who was a senior aide at Buckingham Palace. There was a guy called Paul Hendry, who was a commander of the Special Branch. Now, Special Branch itself, it's no longer in existence. It's the anti-terrorism squad today, but back then, they were the people who used to do the dirty work for MI5.
Right, so we're talking about now that MI5 was involved.
Right. Oh, they had to be, because Special Branch were the people who did all the arrests on behalf of MI5. Right. They were the ones who carried
And so,
out the
what we're saying here is that it was the Terrorism Act was used because there were politicians and all these important people involved. And so the police were told by secret services, that's it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You have to remember what NAYPIC was about. It was about young people in care, and our job really was to ensure that, you know, the kids had the right to complain, to have their complaints taken seriously and to be properly investigated, be it the local authority, police or whatever. And very soon after Carol Kazir came to see us, we were approached by a number of young people who'd been in the care of Richmond Council.
Right. What we're getting at here really is that the kids, Elm Guest House was a child brothel.
Yes, it was.
That's what it was. So now we're talking about where the kids came from, really.
It had been opened as a gay guest house, but very quickly turned into a brothel. I mean, there's no question about that.
So perhaps the gay guest house was even like a bit of a cover for it.
The sequence of events was that the abuse had started. What had happened in 1977, the Silver Jubilee, they started events which they called Kings and Queens parties. Now, at these Kings and Queens parties would be politicians, pop stars, whatever, where they would dress up in silly outfits.
Kings and Queens, like, so because it was gay, they would dress up as women and
whatever.
And when you're saying it happened, that it started around the Jubilee,
around the Silver Jubilee,
Jubilee,
that very quickly became a regular event.
So the Kings and Queens party.
Kings and Queens parties. Now,
what were they exactly?
Yeah, but before you get to that, you've got to remember what NAYPIC was. We were about kids. We were not about investigating politicians or doing the work of the police.
What does NAYPIC stand for?
National Association of Young People in Care.
Right.
It was about kids in care. So if you're going to do it, if you're going to provide boys, that had to be organised and run by somebody within the care system, within Richmond Council. Somebody was grooming and providing these boys to the Elm Guest House. So we very quickly got on to the entire ring seemed to be centred around Grafton Close Children's Home, where the officer in charge was called Neil Keir, and his deputy was the guy who's just been arrested, John Stingemore.
So they were in charge of the kids' home?
They were in charge of the kids' home, and they were the ones who were not just...
Was it just a boys' home, or was it...
It was just a boys' home in Grafton. But they were sexually abusing the boys and grooming them and providing them for sex.
So, if I can just interrupt you, Chris, we've got Elm Guest House, Kings and Queens party, a gay party place, really. That's what he's put up for. So they've gone for the boys. They're not interested in the girls.
No.
So we're talking about all these guys that went there were gay.
Were gay, exactly. And it very quickly became apparent that the people in charge at Grafton were providing boys for porn videos and for porn photographs, CSA type photographs.
At Elm Guest House?
No, at Grafton and to other quite well-known local people in political circles in Wandsworth and Richmond.
So they were sending the kids out so that the kids could be filmed, pornographic films, whatever they wanted to do. And again, I would like to stress that these are very vulnerable children.
Oh yeah.
And sort of 99.9% of them from the lower classes.
Yeah. Oh.
Uneducated.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you had people like Donald Naismith, who was Director of Education for Wandsworth. Stingemore was providing boys to him at £20 a time.
No.
For porno videos, yeah. So then when it comes to Elm Guest House, in Elm Guest House, you had what were known as the facilities. Now the facilities were a sauna room and what was grandly called a video conference facility. But we're talking 1980.
What, in the sauna?
In the Elm Guest House, you had a sauna and you had a video conference facility. But bear in mind, if you wanted to do a video conference in 1980, you'd need a bloody great big BBC van outside with a huge satellite dish. So it was rubbish. It was basically a VHS video recorder, camera, and a big TV set. That was the video.
They were filming the kids. Whatever they were doing to the kids, they were filming the kids.
So there were, but aside from that, it turned out later there were two lots of things. There were the photographs and videos that were made in the video conference facilities, which were being professionally edited and distributed to whoever buys this sort of stuff. But there were also photographs being taken by Carol Kazir herself of the Kings and Queens parties.
So Carol Kazir was taking her own pictures as well.
Taking her own pictures, if you like, for her photo album.
Yeah.
Because she always presented herself as being a victim. She was the victim in all this. She'd been taken advantage of by all these nasty people. The reality was she was a cunning, cold, calculating woman. She knew exactly what had been going on in her guest house and she was quite happy to profit from it. Now bear in mind you're talking about a small guest house in southwest London in 1980. I know from looking at books, and I've still got copies of the paying in slips and all that guest house was turning over about £10,000 a month.
And what year was this again?
This is 1980.
And that was quite a lot of money.
A lot of money. I mean, that would be the equivalent of a guest house today earning, what, £50,000-60,000 a month.
Well, let's just give the audience the full flavour of the guest house, right? So this was a brothel. They were making films of what they were doing to the kids.
Yeah.
And there were, now, give us some of the names who used to go there.
They were also providing kids. So some of the people that used to go there would be people like Harvey Proctor,
who was
a senior Tory MP. He was later, a few years after Elm Guest House, he was later convicted for sexual offences against boys. You had people like Leon Brittan, who at the time I think was Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, but then became Home Secretary. You had Cyril Smith MP who was there. You had people like Colin Jordan, who was the leader of the National Front, who was a very close friend of Harvey Proctor. Now those two in particular were into the really nasty end of...
Well, if I would just say, I remember seeing an interview with David Still, Member of Parliament, and he was being questioned about the guy you was just talking about, Cyril Smith.
Yeah.
And he said, for God's sake, I don't know what all the fuss is about. All he was doing was smacking a few boys' bottoms.
No,
now, yeah, but he said that. David Still actually said that, and he said it in an interview. Yeah. So it was like it's the arrogance of these people, you know.
It's totally arrogant. He wasn't just smacking boys. What we're talking about is taking whips and canes to the bottoms of 10 and 11 and 12-year-old boys. This wasn't anything about this wasn't 18, 19, 20-year-old youths who knew what they were doing and were doing it for money.
Yeah.
These were children who were being exploited at this place.
Yeah.
And people like Sylv Smith knew exactly what they were doing.
Also, he was telling me about the night of the raid, they took Carol Kazir's son. How old was he?
He was 10 then.
He was only 10.
Yeah.
And tell that story.
Right. Well, I mean, for a start, the raid itself was like something out of Keystone Cops. You had 2 undercover police officers who'd been there for, I think, 3 days prior to the raid.
Yeah.
One of them actually had his a plaster cast on his arm and a sling with a microphone in it, which didn't work. So he could never give the signal for the raid to take place because it wasn't working. You had neighbours ringing Richmond Police Station complaining about men up in trees, which turned out to be special branch officers keeping the place under observation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it really was quite a farcical performance.
But the thing is, they took Carol Kazir's son into 10 years of age.
One small important point. There was only 5 guests actually at the guest house because the day before, Carol had been warned that the raid was coming by a man called Gary Walker. Now, Gary Walker was a senior member of Sinn Féin IRA. Now, if you're talking 1982 London, at the height of the bombing campaign, that a senior member of Sinn Féin IRA is walking around London unobserved, unchallenged.
Going to Elm Guest House and meeting people like Leon Brittan.
Exactly.
For God's sake, so we've got Sinn Féin meeting Leon Brittan at Elm Guest House where they were doing...
Yeah, which makes it, as you can appreciate, once you get somebody like him in there, this is not a local vice raid. You cannot tell me that somebody like Walker would be walking around London without being closely followed by a special branch or MI5. He warned Carol Kazir the day before the raid, so he knew, Walker knew, Sinn Féin knew that the raid was going to take place. And after the raid had happened and the Kazirs were on bail, Walker offered to provide Carol and her family with false birth certificates, false passports, and get them out of the country. So it wasn't just a local vice raid. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. Let's just go back to the kid, her 10-year-old boy, being taken into care and where they put him on the night of the raid.
I'm with you. Now, this is where the whole thing, bear in mind, by profession myself, I was a residential social worker with children. That's what I did for a living. So if I understand anything at all, I do understand how the social services system worked. I knew how things were done, who to go.
You was on the ground.
I knew who to complain to, how the system worked. Now, when the police, because they knew that Carol Kazir's son Eric was 10, was living there, they also suspected, in their own words, that other children might be present. They approached Richmond Social Services, told them about the raid. Now, procedure dictates that normally you would have got, say, the local field social worker in the local office who would have accompanied the police on the raid. Any children present, they would have taken them into care. However, on the day of the raid, the man from Richmond Council, who was on the raid with the police, was Neil Keir, the officer in charge at Grafton, who took Eric into care.
That's her son, Eric.
That's her son, Eric. So you can understand
why
she
Carol was
so angry.
She knew that all the kids were coming from this children's home, and then what they've done on the night of the raid, they took her own child and put her own child in that children's home.
But with the very guy who'd been one of the people supplying the boys. So Carol knew full well
she
what
knew
meant.
what was going to happen to her boy.
That's
But
it. That's what
wasn't it the case that Carol Kazir also allowed her own child to be abused by customers at Elm Guest House?
That was an allegation.
So
was made.
only
That
who
was
made
an-
that allegation?
That was an allegation that were made by a number of people we know, and I'm certainly there were newspaper reporters who said that, but we never spoke to Eric, so I cannot say, you know, because he's the victim in this.
But well, it was an
and
allegation
It
anyway.
was certainly an allegation that she
Yeah.
had.
Yeah.
I mean, Eric's grown up now, it'd be for him to say. But I think you then get a picture of how big this thing was when they just threw the rule book out the window, and then once the raid had happened, it suddenly all became, oh, it's just a local brothel,
Yeah.
nothing to do with Special Branch, nothing to do with MI5, because they effectively silenced Carol Kazir
By taking her son.
and putting him in Grafton,
Yeah.
because she understood exactly what was
Grafton was one of many supermarkets
Yeah,
for children.
Yeah, exactly.
To do what they want.
Exactly.
And one thing we never touched on, also in this video suite, there was also a regular visitor there, and his name was David Hamilton Grant.
Yeah.
David Hamilton Grant was a child pornographer.
Yeah.
He made child pornography and
Distributed it.
distributed it, and the possibility of snuff movies as well.
Yeah.
Now, the snuff movies, for people, if they don't know, is the kids being killed, tortured.
Yeah, but you need to understand where this starts from, and we're talking about, if you're talking about the movies that were made in the video conference facility, but you have to broaden it out and understand the Kings and Queen parties. Now, most of the people who attended the Kings and Queen parties were from organisations like the Monday Club.
And what was the Monday Club?
The Monday Club was a right-wing Tory party club for extreme right-wing views, and people like Harvey Procter belonged to it. All those sort of people belonged to it. Now, one of the people who was involved with Carol Kazir, if you go back to prior to the raid, the evidence we've got, and indeed still have, is the Monday Club paying for adverts in Capital Gay, which was the main gay newspaper in London.
Capital Gay.
Capital Gay for the Elm Guest House. They were also paying for adverts to be put in a magazine called Spartacus. Now, Spartacus was a magazine run by a man called John Stamford, who operated out of Holland. Stamford ran a European-wide vice ring involving children. He was a known paedophile. He was a known maker of very nasty child pornography.
Torture.
And when I say nasty, I'm talking about pornography with 2-year-olds and 18-month-old babies.
Yeah.
You know, that was the kind of
Yeah.
guy he was. So you had, if you look at the photographs, even today in the press, of the Elm Guest House from the time, you'll see in the window of the doorway a sign that says Spartacus Club members welcome.
Right. Yeah.
So Spartacus members got a 10% discount. Now, one of the things Stanford did with there was a man called Peter Glenn Cross. Peter Glenn Cross was the UK director for Spartacus. He ran the Spartacus organisation over here. He was very closely connected to the Monday Club, along with a guy called John Rowe.
Was the Monday Club just in Elm Guest House, or was it known outside?
Club, outside. It was
Right, so it
was a countrywide. It's the right wing of the Tory party.
Yeah, right.
The Monday
okay.
Club is actually is in the House of Commons itself. It's
Yeah.
people. It's like
So we're talking about all of them. We're not just talking about Labour.
No.
You know, we're talking about the Tories.
Yeah.
We're talking all of them.
Everybody. But you've got to remember that you have people like John Rowe. Now, the other people who paid for adverts in the Spartacus magazine and in Capital Gay was a company called Roro Investments Limited. Now, Roro Investments Limited was run by John Rowe's brother, Michael Rowe. He called himself Captain Paul Reinhardt, but he'd never been in the armed forces. He just liked to call himself a captain. So you have this whole organisation around the Elm Guest House. So when you're talking about the nasty end of the snuff movies, that was where Spartacus came in. Now,
So, what I want the audience to understand, Chris, is we're not talking about a sort of lower class, ignorant people here. We're talking about well-educated individuals. We're talking about people in very high, powerful, predominant positions in all fields, whether they were doctors, psychiatrists, police officers, army, secret service, members of parliament, and of course the entertainment industry, who they seem to be putting up front at the moment and giving us these pissy little wankers like Michael LaVille, whose name is Michael Turner, Michael Turner.
But Bill, you've got to remember the times.
But these are educated people.
Hang on, you've still got to put it in context. The context of the time was you had genuine gay organisations who were campaigning for gay rights, but they had been totally infiltrated by paedophiles. So you had the Paedophile Information Exchange, the infamous PI. They had totally infiltrated groups like the Campaign for Homosexual Equality, the Conservative group Campaign for Homosexual Equality, Olga, even what's now Liberty. So you had all these people who were campaigning for gay rights, also campaigning to have paedophiles also treated as a oppressed minority.
Yeah.
So
almost as victims.
Almost, yeah.
As victims.
That's how they saw themselves, as being victims of this. So you had these people within all these organisations. They were very, very clever. They were well financed. As you say, most of them were well educated.
Untouchable.
Oh, a lot of them were.
But if I could just say, like, one of the things that I'll keep batting in on little things, Chris, like this. But what it is for a grown man to penetrate a newborn baby and possibly whatever, that the audience, they can't get that. To make a film where you kill a child, torture a child, whether it's a baby, whether but children, okay, and to make a film of the torture, the face, because they like the expressions on the face, the screaming of the kid. It's what kind of people are these? We're talking about people that are running society, telling us how to live, how to fucking live. Sorry about that, but I'll get angry on it. You know what I mean?
Down a notch. You come back to say you like me and like everybody else get so angry at even the thought of anybody touching a 4-year-old child. These were people who seriously believed that 4-year-old children have sexual feelings and have the right, as they put it, to express those feelings. In other words, it's perfectly natural for 4-year-olds to be having sex with grown-ups. This is what the paedophile mindset was. People were trying to get this taken seriously, that this was okay. So you had Geoffrey Dickens, MP, who produced a file on these paedophiles, naming and had all the evidence, including their manifesto, which said sex with a 4-year-old should be legalised. Geoffrey Dickens in 1982 handed that file to the Home Secretary to be investigated. Who was the Home Secretary he handed it to?
Leon Brittan.
Leon Brittan. What's happened to that file? Nobody knows. Ask Leon Brittan today, as many journalists have, he fails to recollect being handed any such file.
That's the Home Secretary.
That's the Home Secretary.
Now, we've got another one, Home Secretary, who's being accused by a guy called Ben Fellows. How that's going to turn out, we will all wait and see. And that is Kenneth Clark. Kenneth Clark as a paedophile.
Who fails to recollect. Now you have civil servants within the Home Office who say this file cannot be found. There is no record of this file ever being handed over. Yet it's you go into Hansard, you'll find that Geoffrey Dickens actually stood up in the House of Commons and spoke about it, so he can't deny that he never received. He just fails to recollect. So on the one hand, you've got these people who are trying to, for want of a better phrase, legalise sex with infants. Yeah? And on the other hand, you've got the people who are using this. I mean, it's about power. All paedophilia is about power and about the abuse of power. So you had if you come back to the Guest House and Spartacus, you can see what was happening, because there was a separate organisation within Spartacus called Spartacus Club. Now, the Spartacus Club was a paedophile organisation along the lines of PIE, and what Stanford and Glen Cross were trying to do was establish a series of guest houses around England which would be safe places for paedophiles to go, not gay people, paedophiles.
Well, that's right, because it's sort of, people were saying Elm Guest House as if it was the only one.
No,
I believe they were all over the place, all over this country, and we just discovered now it's just coming, and Europe, the whole world actually, it's just come out in Florida, which is next to Alabama. They're saying that they found children's bodies in an children's ball stall in Florida. And they expect to find up to 100 children's bodies. Now that's what I'm bringing, me personally, into the arena in this country, is that there are children's homes. There's no doubt in my mind that have been standing for many, many years, go back to beyond Victorian times, and I believe there are children buried there. Because today's victims are tomorrow's witnesses. And when you've got powerful people like that, like Leon Brittan, if you've got film of him abusing a child, he will do whatever you want. So therefore, I also believe that world politics is being controlled via blackmail, paedophilia, by blackmailing these people. So paedophilia, it is really, a lot of the public will say, well, as long as my kids are all right. It's not that, because it's not just affecting your kids, it's affecting your politics of your country, the way you live, the way they allow you to live, what taxes they take off you. It's all take. Keeping our heads so we don't know whether we're coming or going. The average person is just get up to work, go back from work, get up to work, pay your taxes, pay your BBC, pay this, pay that. So people haven't really got the time to understand how it does really affect them.
I think what people don't realise, people assume that if a child goes missing, there'll be a hue and cry. Yeah? People will be complaining, they'll be out looking, they'll be on the front page of the newspapers, 7-year-old boy has disappeared. Madeline McCann. Children in care, as you and I both well know historically, don't exist as far as the public are concerned. They're taken into care, they're hidden away from the public. Now,
because the institutions, they distance the public from it because of what's been going on. There would be outcry, and it could bring the government down.
Right. But even more than that, Bill, it comes down to how many children within the care system go missing every year. If you look at the way the system operates, it appears to have safeguarding within it.
Yeah, because we're bringing it up to date. You're bringing it up to date now.
No, I'm talking about...
But it's still going on.
It's still going on, but let's be clear in people's mind. People think of social workers and social services being good things. They are the people who take care of that sort of thing. Yeah, if children are being abused, who looks after them? It's social services. They're in care, they're safe, they're protected.
But we've got the secret family courts.
That's what people think. I'm not talking about reality, I'm talking about what people think.
Absolutely.
Part of what people think is right, in that if a kid goes on the run from a children's home, then the staff in the home will fill out a missing persons report, hand that missing persons report to the police, who'll stick it in a filing cabinet. Yeah? Whether that kid comes back or not, nobody knows.
It's happening all the time, but every now and again we'll get it in the papers, there's a little girl gone missing, there's a little boy gone missing. They have to feed us every now and again. But the way they do it, they make it look like it's only very rare.
Within the care system, it doesn't happen to... Nobody checks.
They're missing every day.
Nobody goes into those filing cabinets and says, what happened to Fred, or what happened to Mary, or what happened...
They're gone.
They're just... And they're filing cabinets full of the stuff that the police eventually end up shredding and starting more files. So it's very, very easy for kids within the care system, particularly if they've got very little family in the community or very little contact, to just disappear completely.
Yeah, but what they would do, they would filter the kids. So if you've got kids like this kid and this kid, their parents, they're still very interested in them. They come and see them every now and again. Don't touch them two. This kid, parents never come. This kid's parents never come. They got no family. They're the two we want. So they got a filter system. So they pick and choose the most vulnerable.
Even worse than that, you have the whole thing about the abuse of wardship orders, where you could put a ring of secrecy around a child. And even somebody like NAYPIC.
Are they still available, those wardship orders? Tell us how they work.
Well, they started to come in about the 70s. They're very ancient. What used to happen in the old days, if you were Lord Percy's son and Lord Percy got killed and you were underage, a wardship order would be issued and a judge would take you on as his ward to protect your inheritance rights. That goes back to the 16th century or somewhere, I can't remember exactly. But it became in the 1970s, being a very easy way of getting kids into care. You didn't have to go to court, you didn't have to argue in front of a magistrate, there wasn't lawyers for the other side. A social worker could go down to the High Court, quick word with the judge, get a wardship order and take the kid and do what they like with it. So you didn't then have to worry about any other laws either. If you wanted to lock the kid up, you didn't have to go to court, quick phone call to the High Court judge. But also, if the child was in, say, Richmond and you wanted to stick him in a children's home in North Wales, no problem. You just took him up there. So nobody would know where that child had gone. And if you got somebody like NAYPIC asking questions, you just threaten them with contempt. I lost count of the number of times that Mary Moss and myself got a letter from a director of social services threatening us with jail for contempt, for daring to talk to a ward of court. They wouldn't if.
So that was saying, that's our kid, leave it alone, go away. You can't talk to that kid. End of story. And it's also, you know, if we go back not so many years, I mean, especially if you're looking at the 50s, 60s, 70s, it was very like for if you had a daughter and she was to get pregnant or have a kid, it was like a shame on the family, wasn't it? Big time. They was doing it in Ireland. They were taking the kids straight from the mothers.
Magdalena laundries.
The Magdalena sisters, And so, you know, in those days, that they were even more vulnerable, because what the parents wanted and what was just get the kid away from our family. This is our daughter. That kid, you can't have a kid. So the kid would go and be taken away. And
out of sight, out of mind.
So what I would like to say is really, we need victims to come forward. They've got to come forward in their droves, because there are droves of them out there that are still suffering, and we need them to come forward. But, you know, I've been told by people, they phone the police and the police are saying, get in touch with us if you've got any information. They're doing it, but it's making it so difficult. It's not as easy as the police are pretending, and the press are putting it across. The national media.
It's very hard for victims, because you've got to put yourself in the position of a victim. If what used to happen, what we found, certainly back at NAYPIC, if, say, somebody was in a children's home or in the community was making porno pictures involving young boys. Now, the police would have raided, say, and arrest everybody there. So you'd have the guy who was making behind the camera, who was making the videos, would get nicked for making the porn videos. But say the two boys who would be having sex in front of the camera, if one was, say, 13, the other was 15, the older boy would get arrested for sexual offences against the younger boy. So even though he was a victim, he would be classed as an abuser. So
they fucked him in more ways than one.
Oh, absolutely. So you just victimise victims all the time. So in terms of trying to get victims of that type of abuse to come forward and talk, they wouldn't.
Why aren't they dealing with this,
terrified.
Chris? Is it because it's the lower class kids? It's all lower class kids, isn't it? 99.9% of them lower class kids. So there is. You're also looking at, as far as I'm concerned, like almost a racism there, a racist culture. You know what I mean?
It was very much like
that. We're shit. We are shit.
Right. So we found that, you know, very poor street kids from estates like Doddington were also being used as rent boys at the Elm Guest House. Now, if I come back to NAYPIC,
can I just go back on that? When you're talking about Doddington, you're bringing another children's home.
No, children. I'm talking about a sink estate. I'm talking about how kids off the street, ordinary children.
Okay, and
so it wasn't just kids in care. It was poor, working class, deprived children.
But what I would also like to say is there was a very big case that was covered up, and Margaret Hodges, she was involved in that cover up, and where was it? That was in Islington. A big case, and the kids were being taken from Islington out to Jersey to Haute de la Garenne, and I would implore you all, to watch a film called Sun, Sea and Satan that Pie Mash Films that we made. We went out to Jersey for 2 weeks. Right, so Doddington.
Sorry, anyway, they were also, the Elm Guest House, I try and bring it back on track.
Yeah.
Because of the involvement of Special Branch and because of the security services involvement, bear in mind we were an advice agency, advocacy agent for children, for young people. We would have kids come into the office looking for help, looking for advice. But we were under surveillance by Special Branch. We had armed Special Branch officers in the car, actually frightening off young people coming to us.
So
physically stopping.
So NAYPIC, so Special Branch was stopping children coming to you with their problems to NAYPIC.
It got so bad at one point we actually had to use a community centre to meet young people. It was at that point, because I was the adult advisor, that I had to think about the welfare and safety. Bear in mind, it was a group of young people. It was groups all around the country. I had to give consideration to their safety. So I went back to Carol Kazir and I said, look, if you want us to proceed with this and you want us to do something about it,
i.e. get her child out of care
and protect the other kids, I need evidence. I need whatever evidence you've got that you say to me, all these people used to attend the Kings and Queen parties or were using the facilities. I need to know what you've got. I think in March 1990, she agreed to meet with me, and I went along to her flat in Richmond where she was living at the time. And in the flat she had a huge big cardboard box, and in that cardboard box there were lots of documents, there were some videotapes and other stuff in there. And it was at that point that she gave me the guest house registers, the bank paying in books, showing the money she'd received.
So the guest house register had everyone's name that was going there, but they weren't using their real names.
Weren't using their real names. But by this time, of course, we knew a lot of the aliases that people like Liam Brittan and Cyril Smith were using.
Cliff Richard.
Cliff Richard was there as a guest. I can't say he abused children. There was no evidence
of him. But he was there. He
stayed there,
He definitely stayed there, Cliff Richard. And what name did he go under on the book?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Was it Gladys or something like that?
No, Gladys was the nickname of his boyfriend, Norman.
Cliff Richard's boyfriend?
Yeah, Norman. Yeah.
Norman was his boyfriend, and they used to go to Elm Guest House. Because we've not heard he's not been nicked.
No, he's not, and there's no evidence in it there is any way. I mean, he was.
Well, if there was, it's gone.
Well, maybe you're right, Bill. I don't know.
Yeah.
But coming back to what was in the box now, she also had about 6 video cassettes in there, and she had a shoebox full of photographs. And there were 2 types of photos. There were Instamatic type photos, with those. Print out the box,
and peel it off.
They were normal 35mm photos. So the photographs that had been taken in the facilities were the ordinary 35mm standard photo. The photos from the Kings and Queens parties were the Instamatic photos.
Right.
So she showed me, I think it was 8 photographs in total of people. Now there was 2 of Liam Brittan. there was one of Harvey Procter,
Member of Parliament.
Member of Parliament. There was another one of a very well-known industrial financial guy. There was a whole series of photographs, and she had hundreds more in this shoebox. She wouldn't give them to me. I said to her, after a lot of wheeling and dealing.
Can we just explain, just give me a description of the Leon Brittan photograph that you saw?
The Leon Brittan photograph, he was wearing naked apart from like a little apron and one of those waitresses' caps, you know what I mean?
Oh right, so he had a maid's
outfit.
A maid's pinny,
yeah.
A maid's hat.
With a boy aged about 12 sitting on his lap.
What was the boy wearing?
Nothing. Naked.
So the boy was naked? Could you see the boy's genitalia?
Yeah, he was about 12 years old. I mean, it was an obscene photograph by anybody's
Yeah, absolutely.
But Carol,
the Home Secretary.
Yeah, but Carol Kazir, as I keep trying to tell people, was not some sort of innocent victim in all this. She was a conniving, cunning bitch of a woman.
Yeah.
She really was. She knew exactly what she was doing.
Yeah.
So she would only give us enough to keep us involved, if you know what I mean,
yeah.
to keep on our good side, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah.
And I said to her, it's not good enough, Carol. I can't just,
unless you give me the photos.
Unless you give me the stuff. She wouldn't do it. What she did eventually agree to do, I think, about 6-8 weeks later, she said I could come round and photograph them myself.
Right.
But unfortunately, of course, shortly after that, she was murdered. So.
Right. So you never got to go around and photograph them, but when you was there, you were probably being recorded and bugged anyway by the Secret Services.
They were sitting outside.
Oh no, that's
they were
right.
Sitting in a car outside, and there is a little story about that. I mean, this shows you how contemptuous the security services and special branch were of people. They knew that they were they could do whatever they liked.
In those days.
In those days.
We're talking about before the internet, etc.
What I would have given for a mobile phone with a camera on it.
Exactly. Chris, can we just jump to Carol Kazir, because you said like where she was murdered.
Yeah.
What was the information that came out in the press?
Well,
how she died.
She allegedly, according to the coroner, she died from an overdose of insulin.
Because she was diabetic.
Which was absolute rubbish.
Yeah.
Really was rubbish. If you read, I was at the coroner, I gave it...
Why do you say it's rubbish? Tell me about the insulin death.
Yeah, I'm just going to tell you. I was a witness at the coroner's court, so I was there for all the proceedings. Now, the pathologist report was quite clear that the oldest syringe mark on her body was 72 hours old. That was the last mark on her body of a syringe. Every doctor I spoke to, a GP, I spoke to pathologists at the King's College Hospital, they were all saying the same thing. If you overdosed with insulin by injection, you'd be dead within an hour. There is no way you live for 72 hours.
Right.
So also the question mark about where this syringe mark was, which was on her bottom. And the evidence from the GP was that she was never given insulin that way. And even though he'd been to see her, he had injected her arm, not her bottom. So where that injection mark had come from, I don't know. There was also the alleged suicide note. Now, everybody that read it, myself, Mary at NAYPIC, her friends, her family.
Mary's another lady who works at NAYPIC, Mary Moss.
She was the worker at NAYPIC,
yeah.
A really good guy. And we all knew it was not Carol's handwriting. Carol didn't write that way, it wasn't her use of language.
So it was a bad fake?
It wasn't even a bad fake, it was just rubbish. The only person who said it was in her handwriting was a man called David Issett. Now, David Issett was a paedophile. If you look at the Mary Moss file that's been put online of all the documents there, you'll see there that I phoned Richmond Police and Richmond Social Services departments when I found out that Issett was in fact living at home with his partner and 4-year-old son, because there was a court order banning him from within half a mile of his home and his son, because Issit and a gangster called Puddles, Patsy Puddles.
That rings a bell, actually.
Yeah, had been abusing the 4-year-old in their hot tub at Puddles' house, which was why there was the court order on him. So you had this, and he was a drug addict and an alcoholic and a thoroughly nasty piece of work. But he was the only one person who said that the handwriting was Carol Kazir.
On a suicide note.
On a suicide note. And the coroner seemed to accept his version. Now don't forget the coroner...
Not really what you would call a credible witness.
No, but the coroner, funnily enough, is the same coroner who did the Princess Diane inquest, and also the Blair Peach inquest.
Well, while we're talking about that, if I can just... The Princess Diana, I'll do it that camera. I don't know, is that in shot? Is that camera in shot?
Dr. Byrne.
So there we've got, they're saying now, Princess Diana was murdered.
Yeah, but Dr. Burton was the guy who did her inquest.
Yeah.
So he was known as being a safe pair of hands, somebody you could trust to come up with the right verdict.
Yeah.
Now at this point, you've met Clive Godden, who's a private detective who was looking at this stuff. Bless his cotton socks, he's a lovely bloke, as you know.
Yeah.
And he kept bouncing up and down in the coroner's inquest saying, that's not true, what are you talking about? And the coroner kept saying to him, will you sit down please and be quiet, Mr. Godden?
But he wouldn't.
But he would.
Because he's a good guy.
He's a good guy. And I started protesting.
And he's now 78.
He's now 78. I started protesting about the note. Clive kept screaming and shouting at the coroner. So in the end, the coroner said, I'll adjourn the inquest until August, and I'll have Scotland Yard's forensic handwriting experts take a look at the note to see whether or not it's their handwriting. So when the inquest was reopened again on the 22nd of August, Brittan, the coroner, came in and he said, right, I've issued a written verdict. There's nothing more to say about it. Bang, case closed.
So wait till August, and that was it.
Nothing. So to this day, I do not know what the forensic handwriting expert at Scotland Yard had to say. Nobody did, because Brittan never told us.
Right. So,
but the one interesting thing above all else, when Tom Watson asked a question in the House of Commons recently,
Member of
Parliament, he also asked about the use of denotices. Denotices are notices that they're supposed to be advisory, but basically if the government doesn't like a story a newspaper's about to print, it'll slap a denotice.
A denotice is a gagging order.
It's a gagging order. Now when Mary Moss and I left the coroner's court, the entire world's press was outside. Obviously it was a very, very big story.
Absolutely.
Because we'd stood in the witness box, we'd named Leon Brittan, we'd named Harvey Proctor, we told the inquest all the evidence we had about who'd been involved at the Elm Guest House. So by any stretch of the imagination, it was a big news story. When we got outside the coroner's court, they were all there, BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Sky, you name it.
Yeah.
Not one single British television station, radio station or newspaper interviewed myself and Mary. We were interviewed by Canadian Broadcasting Radio and a Japanese television station. And I spotted the BBC reporter who I knew, and I went across to him and I said, what's going on? And he said, denotice, Chris.
Denotice.
So denotices were used.
Yeah.
That's why there was very little coverage of that inquest in the national press in June, and it wasn't. In July, and there was a little bit of coverage in some of the press when the inquest was resumed in August.
Now, when it was 2 years after Carol Kazir died, and you were continuing your fight against Elm Guest House and many other investigations, Chris, as you do, thank God people like you are about, and 3 bullets came through your kitchen window 2 years after that.
Yeah.
Now, Tell us about that.
Well, I don't want to talk to her because I don't want to make this about me. But I mean, obviously.
But you've been investigating it. You know.
It was obviously when you're dealing with the sort of people that we're dealing with. You're not just dealing with the security service, but you're dealing with. Don't forget international child pornography trade. We found out, you know, there was connected with the Monday Club and Spartacus, there was a company called Toff's Travels Limited, which was physically taking boys in care out to Holland.
Or wherever.
Well, they were definitely going to Holland.
Yeah.
And it was in Holland we had quite a lot of evidence that snuff movies were being made.
Yeah.
Now, you know, we tried as an organisation to be as professional and as reasonable as we could, and we checked out everything that we were told to the best of our ability. Now, I didn't know whether snuff movies existed or not. It wasn't my area of expertise. So I in fact talked to, and I think in the NAYPIC logbook, which we gave to which Fernbridge took off me, that's Operation Fernbridge, the police investigation that's looking at Grafton and Elm.
Yeah.
And I spoke to Interpol, Europol, the FBI, any organisation, the United Nations, child exploitation, the European one, about snuff movies. And the official view in 1990 of all those organisations, including the Metropolitan Police, was that snuff movies did not exist.
Yeah.
They were an urban myth.
And children weren't buried when they were
Exactly.
killed.
But that
in
was,
children's homes.
So the official view of that was that it just didn't exist.
Right, well that is opening up now because there were many snuff movies made and many children killed. Okay, so I know you don't like talking about it, but let me just round it off and then we're going to move on to where we are now.
Right.
But the point is, you did have 3 bullets come through your window.
Yeah.
It took the police an hour to get there and you've heard nothing. You
Yeah.
have also...
And one PC turned up.
And one PC turned up. And so you've also presented this evidence yourself and Mary on 3 different occasions.
Oh, numerous occasions. I mean, you know, the whole point, if you've got evidence of some, and you've got kids who have been abused, who do you go to? You have to go to the authorities.
Yeah.
To the local council.
But you've been there and they've done nothing.
Well, exactly.
On many occasions. So you keep giving this evidence and now...
And nothing.
Right, so here we are. What's the date? Maria, what's the date?
It's the 7th of September 2013.
Right, so we all heard that.
So,
where are we now?
Well, we are now, as a result, I believe, of Tom Watson, MP, who asked questions of the Prime Minister in the House. I was approached by Tom Watson, because I'd retired years ago. I'm 67 now, so I've been out.
Well, you're looking good for it.
Thank you for that, but I mean...
my pleasure.
I've retired, so as far as I was concerned, this was all in the past for me. But I was approached by Tom Watson, who wanted me, so I went up to see him in the House of Commons and told him basically what we've been talking about now, about everything I knew about Grafton and about Elm Guest House and about a lot of other abuse.
And what was his response?
Oh, he was shocked and horrified.
But what has he done?
He was instrumental in getting the Metropolitan Police to establish Operation Fairburn, which was the original investigation to look, established I think in October last year, that was going to a scoping exercise to try and see...
What was Fairburn about?
But that's what I'm saying. It was a scoping exercise to see what information was available. As a result of Fairburn, they set up Operation Fernbridge under Detective Chief Inspector Paul Say.
And that is, Operation Fernbridge is solely about the guest house.
Elm Guest House and about Grafton.
Yeah.
Although it has spawned, I mean, these operations seem to spawn like rabbits. Yeah. There is now yet another investigation coming out of that called Operation weird name, Coyote or something like that. But
so you told Tom Watson.
So I told Tom Watson. So then I was approached by DCI Settle. who came to see me at my home, I think in January of this year.
Yeah.
He wanted, obviously, to know what I knew, and he wanted any documentation that I might still have. Well, as it happens, I still had the, NAYPIC logbook, in which a lot of stuff. I also had the original charge sheets for, not copies, but the originals of Calcas's charge sheets.
Have you still got them?
Yeah.
Oh, right, good.
Because I felt that stuff was important, because the whole of this thing hangs around, it seems to me, whether or not they raided the house under the Prevention of Terrorism Act or under vice legislation. Now, Settle and Fernbridge are saying that they're towing the party line. They're saying it was an operation carried out by local police under vice legislation.
Where'd the terrorism thing come from?
Well, hang on a second, I'll get to that, but this is the line being peddled by... Now, I've asked him point blank whether or not there is evidence. If you're going to say this, there has to be evidence. But apparently the police records of the raid are no longer available. They've disappeared. Not surprisingly.
Disintegrated,
gone to the
spontaneous combustion.
Warehouse in the sky. And the thing that shocked me most of all was that even the records of her trial at the Old Bailey no longer exist. I didn't realise until Settle told me this, that the Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Services only keep court records for 10 years. After 10 years, they're destroyed. I mean, I couldn't believe this, because, I mean, you
I don't believe it.
All of us.
I don't believe it.
You can go to the public archives and you can read about the trial of Dr. Crippen 100 years ago.
Yeah.
In detail. But
they know that. They don't want people reading about them in 100 years' time.
But what happened in 1982 doesn't exist anymore. You can find out what happened in 1912, but not in 1982. Extraordinary.
Well, there you go. Anyway, so I'm getting the wrap it up. Are we rolling on this one?
Yeah, it's still rolling.
Oh, okay. So we're going to wrap it up on that.
Just bring it up very quickly up to date. A couple of weeks ago, I was trying to get back a copy of the NAYPIC logbook, so I approached Fernbridge. And I asked Fernbridge if I could have a copy of the logbook back. They said yes, they'd get a DC to drop it off. Nobody turned up. They then rang me up and told me the detective sergeant would be popping it round. Never turned up. The following day I went to go out to the shops, and I've opened the front door, and standing on my doorstep is DCI Paul Settle himself, who was passing by.
Just passing by and popped in to see you after all these years. After all these years.
Have a cup of tea and a chat, yeah.
Well, listen, I'm going to finish it there. This is a very brave man. This man was a witness at Carol Kazir's inquest. The police have recently been to see him. He's talked to MPs. He's talked to everyone. And you're in a very precarious position. So you don't think so, Chris, because you're too brave. And we're going to get this up as soon as we can, and hopefully that will give you some kind of protection. Because let me just finish, Chris, because I think
enough of it's out there, Bill. Good people like yourself and other good people online who've got all the story. They've got all the facts. So whatever happened to me, they won't be allowed to cover it up.
Well, let me just finish up on something personal then. All right. I fucking hate the national media. You've been covering up this shit for so many years. And you reporters, where's Tom Savage? What's happened to Tom Savage? Tom Savage came and saw the original interview that I'd done with Chris Fay, and all of a sudden Tom has been suspended, nicked under another charge, nothing to do with us, even though he went out to Cyprus and he was investigating child pornography, snuff movies, looking for David Hamilton Grant. David Hamilton Grant is supposed to be dead, but he's not dead. He's alive and kicking, and he's out in Turkey. And he was making pornographic films of children out in Turkey because where he had to pay 500 quid for a kid here, he used to be able to get them for a fiver out there. Thank you very much, Chris. Love ya.
You too, mate.
God bless you, bruv.